Chapter 8. Home. Ruth shivered, her eyes staring ahead at that familiar darkness within the forest. It had been so many years since she stood at this very spot. This was it, the source of all of her painful memories, the nightmares almost every night, all due to her stupidity back then. It was time to end it all. She tightened her grip on the container of fuel in her hand, exhaled, and proceeded forward. The air was still. Could she sense her right now? Ruth's pounding heart made it hard to listen for anything. She continued forward all the while, her eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness. Each of the looming bodies around drove her heart further into the depths. She kept expecting the pale creature to pop up from behind one, ready to pounce and make her claim. Why not, though? Ruth was in fact walking into the devil's den voluntarily. But she had no choice. The easiest way to attract something was with bait. Unfortunately, she was it. As she continued forward, she caught sight of a familiar glow ahead, forming a knot in her stomach. That didn't take long, she whispered to herself. This was it. That thing waited ahead. Ruth found her legs wobbling as she advanced. She needed to be strong. She had come this far, and now wasn't the time to back down. Up ahead, the light started to pulse, seemingly syncing with the rhythm of her heart. One last tree blocked the view ahead. She swallowed and braced herself to confront the demon. Ruth walked around the tree and came to a halt. Her eyes widened, and her mouth hung open in awe. She saw someone standing at the opposite end with their back to her. It was a woman, donning a familiar red coat. She was crouching down, facing a large tree with a gaping knot at its base. The source of the glow was coming from inside. "This was it, huh?" The woman spoke out loud without turning around. "This was why you came out here, right?" She reached inside the knot and pulled out a glowing flower, the same one from all those years ago. With it in hand, she turned around. Tears welled up in Ruth's eyes. All she could do was stand there speechless. The container slowly left her fingers, plopping into the snow. "This would have made a wonderful gift, Ruth. I absolutely love it." "Mom?" Ruth stammered, her lip quivering of joy. "Is that really you?" The woman smiled and nodded. "Hi, sweetie. I've missed you so much. Look how much you've grown." Ruth coughed out a half-hearted laugh amidst her smile. She took a step forward. "Mom, how are you here? I thought you were..." "Gone," her mother finished. "I was, sweetie. But I came back. For you." "But where have you been all this time?" Ruth advanced a little more. "Don't you remember? I left with Fiona. She took me to see Mother." Ruth halted. "What?" "I saw her, baby," her mother continued. "And she was so gorgeous beyond words. She's everything Keone said she was, loving and caring. I've been telling her all about you, and she's eager to meet you." She held out a hand. "Come." "Mom, why are you saying this? What's wrong, baby? What's wrong with you? What did she do to you?" Her mother frowned. "I don't understand what you mean, Ruthie. Don't you want to come with me? We can have a new home together, with Mother. Wouldn't that be nice, to be with each other forever?" Ruth shook her head, backing up. "No, you're not my mother." "Don't say that." Ruth picked up the container of fuel, opened the cap, and began to fling its contents all over the surrounding trees. "No, you're not my fucking mother." Tears ran freely down her face. "You're not her! You're not her!" She dropped the half-empty container in the snow and pulled out a flare gun.
"Now, Ruthie, don't you dare do that,"
her mother stated firmly. Her voice took on a more layered effect.
"Put it down."
Ruth felt rage boiling over within her. How dare that cursed thing use her face? Of all the vile things it tortured her with, this was beyond crossing the line. She pointed the flare gun at the nearest tree.
"Ruth, stop it now!"
"Fuck you," she whispered back and pulled the trigger. Immediately, a large spark rocketed out of the barrel, colliding into the trunk, igniting it into flames. The fire swiftly engulfed the tree, bathing the entire area with its orange rays. Ruth aimed the flare gun at another tree and repeated the action. In the light, she could now see her mother clearly. She was bemused. It looked exactly like her. Those eyes, every strand of hair, even the mole on her cheek. How is that possible?
"You shouldn't have done that, Ruthie. What's gotten into you?"
Ruth aimed the flare gun at her. More tears welled up in her eyes. Her hand shook as her finger lay on the trigger. Why was she hesitating? This thing wasn't her. If she pulled the trigger now, all of this could end. Her mother's face softened. "Ruth, please. Did I not protect you back then? Is it wrong for me to ask you to be by my side, to wish happiness for us?" Ruth bit her lip. "Stop! You're not her! You can't be!" The gun started to falter in her hands. "It is me, Ruth. It's time to stop fighting, baby. It's time to give in. Mother is waiting for us and we can join her together. I've missed you all this time. Please don't let me go on alone without you." "I can't. You're not," she stammered. She managed to lift the gun and aim. "Please, Ruth. You have to remember."
"None may reject the call when chosen,"
Felton whispered into Ruth's ear. He swiftly wrapped his arms around her neck and yanked her upward, causing her to fire a shot into the sky. She screamed out in pain as he twisted her wrist, forcing her to drop the gun into the snow. "You're doing so good, baby girl," he said, lifting her by her neck until her feet dangled above the ground. "Why'd you have to go and do something like this?" Dad! Ruth coughed, struggling to breathe. "It's okay, though. All will be forgiven." He started to walk with Ruth towards her mother. Ruth kicked and screamed, attempting to free herself from his grip, yet it proved to be useless. He was too strong. Her mother extended her hands out into an open embrace. "Dad, stop! Please!" Tears were streaming down her face as she continued to fight. "You don't see it now," he replied. "But I promise all will be better in the end. You'll see. Mother Guy's will is absolute." "No!" Without warning, a loud gunshot shattered the air. Felton collapsed, dropping Ruth in the process. She rolled over and coughed. When she looked over, she saw Carol crouched in the back with a rifle. "Carol? Ruth, get out of there now!" she yelled. She ejected the empty casing and loaded another round into the chamber. Ruth glanced over to Felton, who had a large hole in his leg from the bullet. However, the wound appeared to not faze him. He quickly got to his feet and began rushing towards Carol with an insane speed. Carol shrieked in terror and quickly shot off another round. This one hit Felton in his lower side. The impact caused him to waver for a second, but he didn't stop. She narrowly dodged him as he threw a heavy swing her way. "You're really starting to piss me off, Carol," he roared as he spun around, tossing another, missing her by a hair. "Why can't you and Ruthie just accept there's no fighting this?" Carol managed to bolt around a tree. She struggled to load another round as Felton immediately homed in on her again. The heat from the flames was beginning to become unbearable as the fire expanded. lapping at the neighbouring trees. She cursed, losing around to the snow from the sweat building up on her hands. She didn't have time to grab it, though, and fished out another from her pocket. Still running, she turned around another tree whilst attempting to reload. However, Felton popped out in front of her. He grabbed the weapon with Carol still gripping it, and slammed her into the ground. She gagged as he pressed the weapon stock up against her throat. "Valiant effort, Carol," he said with a twisted grin. "But it's over." Ruth suddenly jumped on Felton's back, attempting to pull him off of Carol. Angered, he effortlessly shook her off, spun around and landed a heavy backhand. She toppled to the ground like a sack of bricks. Felton then reeled the rifle from Carol and beamed it deep into the forest. Afterwards, he grabbed the two by the neck and pinned them to the ground. "Enough of this nonsense!" Ruth moaned at the sharp pain pulsing across her back. She glanced over to Carol, who was helplessly looking back.
"I'm sorry, Carol,"
Ruth whispered.
"I tried."
Tears ran down Carol's face as she smiled.
"It's okay, honey. We both did."
She slid her hand over to Ruth, who took it. The two squeezed them tightly. Still in place, Ruth's mum started to glow in a bright white light. As she did, the air grew cold, the wind picking up slightly. From it emerged Keone's pale form.
"It looks like you're finally ready."
She spoke with a toothy smile. She started to walk towards them, releasing that familiar sickening crack from her legs.
"Mother will be pleased."
She was caught off guard as the fuel container from earlier was suddenly thrown through the air, landing at her feet. Instantly, its contents began pooling out. She stared down at it with a puzzled look. Everyone turned towards its origin, and they were all surprised to find Alex standing there. He looked disheveled and tired. Dry blood caked down the side of his face. In his hands, he aimed the flare gun at Keone. "You're one ugly bitch," he stated and pulled back on the trigger. Her eyes widened as the flare shot at her feet, igniting the flames. She let out an ear-piercing scream and began scrambling around aimlessly as the fire engulfed her pale body. Felton joined her shrills, releasing Ruth and Carol, to clutch his head in pain. Strong wind suddenly erupted around them, releasing a loud cry in its voice, tossing up snow into mini torrents. Keone's screams became layered and escalated into deeper cries of agony. Felton was on par until finally he slumped over to the side and fell still. "Hey, move your asses!" Alex yelled over. "We gotta get the hell out of here!" His voice barely carried over on the wind, but it was enough to spark life in Ruth and Carol. They quickly rose to their feet, hands still clasped, and took off towards him. The gale picked up, obscuring their view with a blanket of white, smothering the fire in the process. Ruth could feel it trying to suck her away. She struggled to move forward, her only anchor Carol, who was guiding her onward. How were they going to escape from this storm? She could barely keep her eyes opened. To make matters worse, the ground started to shake, accompanied by the sharp, jagged pieces of ice that began to jut up like thorns. "Look out!" Carol screamed and shoved Ruth to the side, just as one of the sharp glaciers shot up between them. It narrowly missed Ruth, grazing her arm in the process as she fell to the ground. She winced from the pain, clutching the wound. The spikes continued to sprout around her. Ruth looked around and couldn't find Carol. Had she gone on without her? "Carol!" She screamed out, but her voice was drowned out by the roaring wind. Off to the side, she noticed a figure stand up. Upon closer inspection, she realized it was Alex. He struggled to maintain his balance in the wind as he scanned the area until his eyes landed on her. "Jesus, move it, kid!" he screamed at her. But she couldn't. She was too afraid to. There was too much going on around. He grunted and ran back towards her, dodging ice shards all the way. "Kid, come on!" he yelled. "We need to—" He was closing in until one of the pieces shot up in front of him, impaling him in the chest mid-run. Ruth cried out in horror. His eyes were wide as he struggled to gasp for air, his hands lifting up to the shard piercing his body. Finally, he glanced over to Ruth, and the light faded from his eyes. She looked away in terror. Carol! Ruth cried out again. Yet there was still no answer. Had she suffered the same fate? Pieces continued to jet up sporadically around her, some getting dangerously closer. Frightened, Ruth hugged her knees and closed her eyes as the chaos went on. Felton slowly opened his eyes. It was morning. He could hear the birds chirping in the distance. Where the hell was he? He caught the hint of smoke and ash in the air. Was there a fire? He glanced around, and to his surprise, tall pillars of serrated ice were scattered about. His head was pounding. Felt like he'd taken a few good ones on the noggin. He tried to recall his last memory, but his mind was jelly. Fortunately, some things were starting to come together. He remembered moving that strange scarecrow outside. Then there was something about voices, but everything afterwards was a blur. Maybe it would come back to him later? Felton attempted to stand, and immediately he was met with a sharp pain. He glanced down and saw that he had a hole, not only in his side, but in his leg as well. "What the hell?" he muttered, wincing. There was no mistaking it. They were bullet holes. When had he been shot, and by who? Dry blood pooled around his body in the snow. He also started to feel a searing pain on his face. He brushed it and felt a dry, rough texture that stung upon contact. His heart leapt in his chest as he screamed out in pain. What the hell was going on? What the hell happened to his face? In a panic, he tried to stand up again, only to be met with an even sharper pain from his wounds. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone there? I need help! Hello?" The air was still, with a white mist lightly blanketing it. He scanned the area further and noticed the trees. He was in a forest. But why? How? His eyes came across a figure standing off to the side with a hunch. He squinted and recoiled as he saw the body of Alex, impaled by one of those many pieces of ice. "Holy shit!" Felton said in shock. "Alex! Please tell me you're still with me! Alex!" Yet his obvious corpse did not respond. Felton saw the pool of blood at his feet and cringed. Promptly his eyes flashed. "Ruth! Baby, you out here?" The air remained silent. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Ruth!" Finally, he heard something stir in the distance. Soft footsteps slowly made their way in the snow until their owner appeared from around an ice pillar. A smile formed on his lips. It was Ruth. Tears of joy fell. "Ruth, are you all right, sweetie?" he asked. She appeared rugged, hair and clothes in a mess, clutching her arm. Her muddled face was covered in light scratches. She didn't respond, keeping her distance. "Ruth, what's wrong?" "Dad?" she asked in a raspy voice. "Is that really you?" He gave her a puzzled look. "What? Of course it's me, darling. Who else would it be?" She slowly took a step forward, the suspicion still in her eyes. "Why are you acting like that?" Felton asked. "What happened around here? Where are we?" She peered deep into his eyes. The blue glow that once occupied them was absent. When she noticed this, her face lightened. "It really is you." She ran up to him and attempted to give him a hug. Felton immediately winced out in pain. "Oh, I'm sorry, Dad." He smiled. "It's fine, baby girl." "Ruth?" Another voice called out. The two turned around to see Carol emerge from another spot. She appeared to be in the same shape as Ruth. Carol scanned around until her eyes settled on them, and instantly she went white. "Ruth, get away from him!" "It's fine, Carol. He's back. She's not controlling him anymore." "Controlling?" Felton repeated. "Okay, I'm gonna need answers. Explain everything. starting with why there's a goddamn hole in my leg. Carol exhaled in relief and chuckled.
Yeah, about that.
Felton tossed her a bewildered look. Don't tell me you had a hand in it. As she approached, Ruth ran up to her and into a heartfelt hug, surprising Carol.
It's finally over,
she whispered into her ear. Carol smiled, hugging her back tightly.
Yeah, kiddo. You know it could have gone smoother if you just told me your real intentions from the get-go.
Ruth laughed.
I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't want anyone else to get hurt.
She attempted to pull away, but she noticed Carol's grip only tightened.
Carol?
She didn't respond, only tightening her hold. Ruth tried to pull away again.
Carol, let go, you're hurting me.
What's going on? Felton asked with concern. Carol, you all right? A smile crept across Carol's lips.
Rejoice, child, she whispered. Mother awaits her daughters.
Ruth's eyes widened. She couldn't believe it. Yet, before she could do anything, her fear suddenly disappeared into a dull haze. Carol loosened her grip and the two stood facing each other with hands locked. What? Felton began. What's going on? They turned to face him, and his heart dropped. Their eyes were glowing blue with a wide smile pressed across their faces. Felton was speechless. Suddenly the ice shards everywhere slowly retracted into the ground, revealing a figure at the opposite end. Felton stared at it in horror. It was pale. Half of it was a girl, whilst the other half, he could only think, resembled a tree. Her face and arms were heavily charred with searing cracks of red, producing a cloud of smoke from her form. He noticed that she had matching blue eyes, piercing back at him, filling his body with an icy chill. That's when it dawned on him. All those times he felt that coldness, heard those voices. It was all from this thing. What the hell are you? Felton muttered.
Mother doesn't like it when I force her daughters. The sons she could care less. However, I'm sure she will approve of it this time. Come.
Instinctively, Ruth and Carol turned and began walking towards her. Terror gripped Felton. Ruthie, what are you doing? Get back here! He screamed out. Don't go near that thing! Carol, stop her! They both ignored him now, pressing onward. Ruth! Felton continued, tears streaming down his face. He attempted to stand again, but was instantly brought down by the pain. Fuck! Ruth! He tried to drag himself over, but again was at the mercy of his wounds. The two walked calmly over to Reunited. She took each of their hands and started to walk away. As they did, a white aura slowly engulfed them. Reunited took the time to glance back and rendered one last toothy grin before they continued forward. Felton could do nothing but scream after them as the three faded into the distance.